everything's a system.
Yeah.
If you configure the system, then you're ahead. So go back to your tax return component. Generally, a tax return is what happened 10 months ago, 9 months ago, 6 months ago. It's not what's happening today. So that's the other thing young people struggle with is the facts are the facts. I'm putting it on paper, but can I put it on the paper differently to get to a different answer?
Bruce. Bruce.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Bizarro Brews podcast. I'm your host, Adam, and today is a little different than how we usually bring on guests on our podcast. Because today we have someone who's spent his entire career in public accounting, working with some of the biggest firms in the industry, and also leading the America's Family Office at EY. He has spent decades helping multi-generational families navigate governance, track strategy, and legacy planning. Bobby has shaped how family offices operate across the US and globally. And today in our conversation, we'll dive deeper on what got him started, his journey throughout, and how his experience has changed going from working as like a client advisor to someone that's like led the entire market for one of the biggest accounting firms in the world. So without further ado, let's welcome Bobby to our podcast. Welcome, Bobby, to the Bizarro Brews podcast. Glad to have you on here. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Adam. So thanks for having me on. And as you know, I just came back from a 2-week vacation, so I'm refreshed and ready. Although I'm sitting at an airport again, so everybody will find that comical. But it was flying around seeing friends and colleagues, so it's very different than when I was working. So again, glad to join.
Nice. Yeah, perfect. So let's talk about. So you have had an incredible career. I was going through like your profile, and I'm really excited to share that with our audience and everything. So why don't you let's start off with why you picked tax as a career first of all, and like what got you in. Like, was there some mentor in college that got you thinking about a career in tax, or did you just fell right in? How did that journey start?
So let me start with the first thing. That's the first thing that everybody asks me about in my career. Everybody's like, did you have this grand plan? The answer is no. And I just got up every day and started doing what I thought was in front of me. So, I mean, I would leave that, Adam, to all of your listeners, that the biggest thing in anything is putting your 2 feet on the floor and getting up and doing something. So if we back up, I didn't have a mentor in college or any of that thing. When I was in high school, I took advanced math and calculus and all kinds of mathematical theory, and I thought I would be an engineer. And my dad said, hey, if you go be an accountant, you'll always have a job. Now, why does that matter? It mattered because my dad, have you ever seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street? The original one. Okay. The original one was really the story of Texas International doing a reverse merger into Continental Airlines. So Continental Airlines back in the 80s was a rich airline. It had its own flight kitchens. It had hotels. It was asset rich. It was bought by Texas International, a bankrupt company, did a reverse merger and stripped all its assets and raided its pension. So all the things in the US you have now of pension protection and 401ks and all of that, it came from that. So that's what I live. So this thing of always having a job and being secure, my dad was laid off after 25 years with the company with no paycheck and no pension. So that's what led me into accounting. I thought I would be an engineer. And then when I went to school, I realized the accountants made a lot more money than the engineers. So that sounds really capitalistic, Adam, but that's kind of where it ended up. And you know, the most complex math an accountant does is on a 10 key, not a HP 10C computer. So that's what got me into the profession. As far as tax goes, the first person I went to work for was a gentleman named Charles Bennett. Charles Bennett grew up in East Chicago, Indiana. If you know where that is, Adam, it's not a great place. It's I wish there were places in the U.S. where we didn't have to talk about that. But he came out of there and he created a CPA firm, and he was a FEMA auditor. He was an FBI agent, and then he created a firm called Bennett Hunt and Company with a childhood friend. And when I went to work for Charles knew Charles Grantham. So if you go back to the early 90s, when the NBA Players Association first negotiated collective bargaining with the NBA, Charles Grantham was the head of the NBA Players Association. So they won collective bargaining against the league, and then the league did not want Big Four accounting firms doing the defined gross revenue audit, which was really agreed upon procedures to say how much revenue did the team make and then how much did the players share in that for their salaries. So Charles's little firm got hired to do defined gross revenue audits. Now that sounds really cool, Adam, like when I say it to you here, but no. For anybody who's on this that knows what agreed upon procedures are, you're in a dark room, nobody wants you there, you're like vouching stuff and they don't want you to find anything, right? So it became painfully obvious that like I was just doing accounting. Charles was going to get to go to the All-Star game and do all the cool stuff, but that was my foray into accounting. But Charles also had a tax firm and he did entertainers and athletes, and so that's how I ended up in tax, but it wasn't some grandioso, like there, I have a good friend, David Kirk, who wrote the net investment income tax regulations. And he will tell you that he woke up like born and loving tax. That was not me. I think I'm fairly good at it, but there was not this passion moment.
Gotcha. Wait, so many questions pop up right there. Okay, first of all, net investment income. I like in my as a staff, I had to go through some regulations. I still don't understand them today.
Well, if you want to talk to David, I can introduce you. So
yeah, so he would have to teach me, like, do a master class on those. Second, so you were just sitting. So you were as an auditor, and this was like back in the day when like auditors were like, okay, actual like dark rooms, no windows in there, and you just vouching.
Yeah, but think of it a firm of 15 people or less, and I am the auditor. As a young guy it wasn't Big Four, it wasn't mid-tier firm, it was a tiny little firm, Adam. So it was like me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
The other thing I did at that firm was they did the accounting and books for a nursing home, and in the U.S., when you have a nursing home, you do reimbursements for Medicare and Medicaid from your patients. They had like a backlog of 10 years of payments they hadn't gotten. So my other project was going through prior Medicare and Medicaid payments, and I got them hundreds of thousands of dollars back. So I didn't learn anything in college, Adam, is what I'll tell you. I barely got through. I struggled. I view myself as a thinker. And once I got out in the real world and I was able to think and do, I was really good at that. So, for your podcast, what I'd say is you're going to learn frameworks and things while you're at university. Those didn't work for me. I had horrible grades. I didn't get college at all. But then when I got in the real world and somebody said, solve this problem, that was easy for me. Like, okay, I'll take it and I'll solve it. There were no study guides. There were no parameters. It was the objective is to get the money back. Here's what went wrong. How do we fix it?
But like, as like your time as like what you spend as an engineer, it always tells you like how to solve problems, right? Because the engineer doesn't have like, you obviously have some formulas you can get through, but there's no right way or one way to get around it, right?
Correct.
So then you have to find different ways. And I feel like as you're an accountant, sure, when you're like early on, if you're like prepping tax returns right now, or if you're just in the locator trying to like get through, why doesn't my TI just tie to my work paper? Sure, that doesn't seem like you're solving great problems, but when you're talking to your clientele who actually need payments and you're trying to work through these processes, that's like requires a lot of logic and thinking through.
I think it's well said, Adam. Everything's a system. Yeah. If you can figure the system, then you're ahead. So go back to your tax return component. Generally, a tax return is what happened 10 months ago, 9 months ago, 6 months ago. It's not what's happening today. So that's the other thing young people struggle with is the facts are the facts. I'm putting it on paper, but can I put it on the paper differently to get to a different answer? Very different, and a lot of people struggle with when I go to planning, which is I get to set the facts and I get to decide what happens, and then I'll put it on paper 10 months from now. So
you're essentially living in the future.
Correct.
Yeah. And then you get to see, especially like you on the planning side, you get to see like, on tax returns even 5 years from now, because the planning or the architecture you set up could have ripple effects that goes through for many number of years.
Yeah, which leads me to my journey. So I was doing that, and then I left and I went to a boutique firm that did high net worth. I hate that term. High net worth people don't like to be called high net worth. It did entrepreneurs, business owners.
Okay.
in a place called Santa Fe, New Mexico. Learned a lot there, and then there started to get really interested in estate planning, took a couple of classes at NY. And really, when I thought about estate planning, it was putting puzzle pieces together based on a set of facts. You had this whole toolkit of things you could do. What were the right tools for the job for a particular family? And then from there, I went to KPMG, the local firm, talked to, and we looked at a couple of mergers, and I had always wanted to get back to the Big Four, Adam, and I told you my grades were horrible. So, I wrote all those letters coming out of college to Big Four firms saying, hey, I want to work with you. And they politely wrote me a letter back and said, go pound sand. So, um,
And it's different from our process now, where you have this like really structured method from college all the way into the pipeline, into the Big Four.
Yes. And what I'd say is if you're not in the Big Four, you can get there if you want to, but there's plenty of smart people who are not at the Big Four. But I did and was fortunate enough to, get to KPMG. Then I really dug into tax. And there was a gentleman, Joe Bob Fleming, who had a photographic memory, Adam. So I would write things and research things and think I was all that smart. And you'd walk into his office and put something in front of him and he'd pause and he'd turn around and he had this huge chest behind him. And he'd open the chest and he'd pull out a drawer and he'd grab something and he'd be like, here, read this. And it was the thing you missed out of all this stuff you did. And this is just when the internet and just when technology research versus the old library. Most of your listeners won't know what that was, Adam, but when I was a young manager, there was a library at our office. It was this huge room. Everything, all the treatises, all the B&As, all the CCH, they were all printed and in that room. And that's where you went for research. There was no clickety-clack. So
actually pulling stuff off the shelf and reading.
But I would never go back to that versus today, right? I would never go back to that versus today. All I'm saying is you can get late. So even in that environment, somebody had something in their desk where they could show me something I didn't think of. In today's environment, what I worry about, Adam, is it is so easy to Google it. Is it good, bad, and what are you missing?
So yeah, that brings up an interesting point. How do you find out those nuances in this day and age, where it's so confident, the information out there, where you're like, okay, I know what the answer is. How do I know what's in my blind spot now?
So it goes back to engineering, Adam. So if you look at the Internal Revenue Code, that's the law. What people don't do is understand how the building blocks are built. So you have the Internal Revenue Code. Then you have the regulations that interpret the revenue code. Then you have all of the other things, revenue rulings, RevProcs, notices that interpret that. And then you have court cases. And court cases to me are the most interesting thing because a court case takes a whole set of facts and applies it to all those things I just talked about. Most young people don't have that framework. They're just putting numbers on paper called the tax return. And you step back from that and you go, look, all those numbers and all that paper and all those tax returns and all those forms are based on the Internal Revenue Code and the regulations and the interpretations that the IRS gave for this or the Treasury gave for this. When you say that sometimes to a young person, they're like, what? You're like, yeah, that form, look at it. The front of a 1040 says income, right? There's one section that says income. There's another section that says adjustments. There's another section that says deductions. There's another section that says tax. You can tie every single one of those to a chapter in the Internal Revenue Code. Everybody's like, and you're like, that's not that big a deal.
Well, it is all connected, but like then it brings up a question which I'm always like thinking about. Is like you, Bobby, you retired, right? And you have this wealth of experience, of decades of experience in there. How do we get people to replace your knowledge with what's already there? Like, you're not there advising clients anymore, like on a day-to-day basis. How do we get your knowledge set that's been like gone and put that into the system right now? Or like, because I feel like there's a gap between new people coming in and what people like you guys have, this engineering framework, which I feel like is not being taught anymore to the younger ones, and they're missing that.
Well, you can't. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. This has happened throughout history, Adam. So it's just a different technology, same problem, different time. Okay, so if you go back to when I came into the profession, one of my jobs was when a new tax act came out, like TCJA. it would come across a fax machine, and my job, you don't know what a fax machine is, probably, Adam, but anyway, and it would roll off on this paper, and it would roll up like this, and then you'd have to take it to a copy machine and copy it.
Okay.
So the speed at which a new tax law came out back then was, as long as we could get it on the fax machine, then we could get it. Previous to that, like the generation before me, they printed it in Washington and sent you a book, and that's how everybody got the new tax code. So the speed is what's changed, not the information, how fast the speed comes. Same thing, I took Lotus. Do you know what Lotus is, Adam? Lotus was before Excel, right? But
Yeah, Lotus 1, 2, 3.
right. So back then, everybody had Lotus. Everybody had, and you did tax forms, and they printed on dot matrix paper, and you went to a copier and copied them onto a form, right? That was, and then you had all these disks that all of a sudden took. When I first did tax returns for a bank, I did them by hand on paper. And everybody goes, oh, we'll never be able to teach anybody with this new technology called a computer, where you just put numbers in and nobody will ever learn how to do this again. So I lay that as context, as that's what we did before, and we adjusted, right? Joe Bob had this big chest of all these articles and things, and eventually that all went into a computer that was searchable. So for me, what I would say, Adam, is it's not about my knowledge or what I did, it's about curiosity. And I find lots of young, curious people. And if you can be curious about what you're doing, the new technology piece of it just makes it easier to gather the knowledge quicker. So I think, just like we talk about in AI, I need to tell the AI what not to do, where to narrow and what to do. Same thing with the professional. There is so much information. How do I understand what system I'm in? So to me, teaching about systems and matrices and processes are as important as the technical piece. The technical piece is the easier piece to grasp now. But there's so much information if you don't have the frameworks and the if you don't have the frameworks in the matrix, like you said in engineering, you can get lost for everything. So what I always told people was, invest in yourself. If you are a professional services person, and everybody's worried with AI that my job's not going to be here, it's the only profession where we invest millions of dollars into the asset. Mm-hmm. The asset walks out the door the minute the asset walks out the door. So everybody that's on your podcast, Adam, that's young and listening, wake up every day and go, I'm not working for whoever the brand is. Yeah. I am working for me, and the more I put in here, they're paying me to put it in here right now, and it leaves with me. It absolutely leaves with me. If we had everybody thinking that way, Adam, nobody has to worry anymore.
That's actually really good. And that's like, I've seen the difference between, like, especially when you work in professional services, like you are a revenue driver, right? So what do? You provide value directly to the client, and you're the biggest asset to the company. And that's how the model has been built, and that's how they provide all of the value over there. Let's go back to your time at KPMG, and you work. Is that when you start getting into private, like
yes,
into the private clientele and the family offices? So let's talk about that journey. So you're a manager there, then you leave for Grant Thornton. How does that transition come about? What pushes you to leave? Because you're obviously working for Bob Fleming, who's teaching you a lot, you're learning a lot. So what brings you up at GT?
So big market events. So I was at KPMG. I wanted to make partner. I became a senior manager. And during that time, two things happened. Tax shelters. If you remember, KPMG got in the gun sights and had 9 partners indicted for tax shelters. Okay. When I was at KPMG, Adam, we had our national tax office was an idea a week. So we had big ideas that we were doing, and then we had ideas. And so if you can find it, you could probably add it to this podcast. There was a frontline expose on KPMG and our what is now referred to as tax shelters, where our tax managing partner was quoted in an email where we said, hey, we're doing these ideas. And they're like, okay, yeah, but if we lose, the penalties aren't that much. So yeah, keep doing them, right? So that even if we got found to have penalties, the fees we were earning far exceeded that. So we should continue. Okay, so yeah. Then you have Arthur Andersen go down under Enron. So you have Sarbanes-Oxley happening. You have tax shelters happening. At that time, I did banks and public companies and private companies, and I was asked to move from New Mexico to North Carolina to work on RJR Nabisco.
I'm just reading Barbarians at the Gate right now.
Yeah, so I was asked to move, and I realized and please don't, anybody that wants to be a tax director, don't get it. I hated tax directors. On the quarterly basis when we had to issue financials and everybody came to me to do what was then, now it's ASC 740, Adam, back then it was FAS 109, the tax accrual into the financial statements. I hated it. I hated all the people that asked me to do it. And what I realized was when I was with an owner, they thought about tax like 1/12 of the time. They thought about all these other really cool things they were doing, and tax was just one of the things they had to consider. And I said, that's way more interesting. So I said, I'm not moving to North Carolina, which set my career back. I want to stay in New Mexico and do middle market private companies. Then Andersen happens, then KPMG happens. And what happened was there were A, B, and C deals. So if you guys go back to Sarbanes-Oxley and what happened to Andersen, the A deals, first of all, Houston was toxic. And then there were A deals. The healthcare practice was going here. The energy practice was going here. So all the big four, the remaining four were carving up the different practices. Then there were A, B, and C offices. An A office was a Denver, a B office, I don't even know what that was, but Albuquerque was a C office, Adam. So to get into a deal, a C office had to get attached to an A deal. So we were trying to get attached to Denver. We were trying to get attached to Dallas. We were meeting, and it was Albuquerque and El Paso was one business unit at KPMG. Then Grant Thornton swoops in and buys 8 offices, 50 partners, and 500 employees from Arthur Andersen. And they bought all the C offices. A gentleman, Randy Robeson, who ran Andersen's private practice, was a lead on that. So Milwaukee, Oklahoma City, Tulsa, Albuquerque, Orlando, Charlotte. Charlotte is, some people would say, hey, that not a, but at the time, it was a C office. So they bought all those offices, 50 partners. So I'm literally in one tower in Albuquerque that's KPMG. The other tower is Arthur Andersen. Grant Thornton buys them. And I'm like, I want to do middle market owners and stuff. I'm like, that's a way better place to be than KPMG. So I walked across to them. Before I did that, and this is going to be the other thing I'd tell your listeners, is be willing to solve the problem. Just don't bitch about it. So I was at KPMG. KPMG had lost 6 tax partners when they regionalized. The tax partners formed their own firm and left. That was before I ever got to KPMG. But I went to Scott Ozanis. Scott Ozanis was the head of, he was Arthur Andersen, and when became the head of the region for KPMG. And I went to Scott and I said, hey, here, I think you know about me. Here's my plan for how I want to rebuild Albuquerque. Scott said, I have no idea who you are. Let's put that aside. But he said, okay, tell me your plan. So I laid out my well thought out plan about how I was going to rebuild Albuquerque into this wonderful tax practice. And he goes, that's great. You can stay in Albuquerque as long as you want, Bobby. You can work there, but I will never make that investment. And I said, why? And he said, because I can make 4 times the money in half the time in Houston or Dallas. He said, it's a great plan, but that market is dying for what we as a big 4 firm, the rates and things we need to grow at. And think billions, not millions. Think hundreds of millions, not thousands in terms of revenue. So it was one of the first times in my career where I solved something. I didn't get the answer I wanted, but at least I tried to solve the problem before I went somewhere else. So that's the biggest thing, Adam, is don't run away from the problems, try to solve them. And I see all this stuff on, what is it, Glassdoor or what those are. Yeah, everybody's running away from it instead of saying, can I solve it? If you put a solution forward and they say no, now you've done your part and you should move on. But then again, before you move on, make sure you're running towards something you're excited about, not running away from something you're frustrated with. So that's what got me to Grant. And then at Grant, I had a client. I did a bunch of charitable private foundation work. And the partner brought me into a meeting with a client. Jim Kramer was his name. And Jim wanted to set up a private foundation. And back to this systems and curiosity, Adam, I didn't just jump into my technical, I know what a private foundation is. I said, why? Why do you want to do this, Jim? Mr. Kramer, I said. It turns out Mr. Kramer had a $100 million company that he wanted to get to $300 million, and he wanted to sell it. And when he sold it, he wanted a piece of it to be for the charitable things that he cared about in the community. That led to a whole different conversation about everything that he was doing with the sale, transaction, estate planning. The foundation piece was that big of it. If I hadn't asked the question, Adam, he would have sat in the room. I would have told him all about foundations, and he would have left that day. But I developed an extremely wonderful and long-term relationship. He passed away about 6 years ago with him and his family, did all their estate planning, did all their planning over years and years and years, developed a deep personal relationship with Jim. And those experiences were, I was like, that was to me way more rewarding than working on an international conglomerate. That's not everybody. That was me.
Your role had changed from like to be more of a counselor to these private families or like middle market family who were like working, because then you're like involved in like the really intimate details of their life, because estate planning, that's just like a really big life event happening. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to think about like them passing, but like
Yeah.
people do get into it. And that's where, did you pick up some skills, or like did you learn like how best to approach those situations when you're talking to someone like Jim Cramer, obviously very well accomplished? How do you like?
So my question for everybody on your podcast, Adam, would be, what publications and business publications does everybody read? So at a young age, I had the Wall Street Journal. I had the Financial Times. I had Forbes magazine. I had Fortune magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the things Jim Cramer was reading. He wasn't reading Tax Notes Today or the Internal Revenue Code. Like he could care less. Like he cares what happens on CNN when taxes come up, but he didn't care. What I learned, Adam, was if I could be well versed in those things, I had a seat at the table. So I call it a knowledge pyramid. Noise is at the bottom, right? Like how many emails did you get today? How many things came out on CNN and everybody else? That's noise.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have data, which is you filter through the noise through AI to get to some data.
Yeah.
Then taking that data and saying, hey, Jim, I heard all these things. This is how it applies to you. That's knowledge. Then from knowledge, I can get into trusted advisor. But what most of us do, Adam, is, right, our firm puts out the latest and greatest. We take it and we zoom it along. So did every other
We were told like, hey, send this email to the client, right? And it's in like that format. Yeah, great.
And the client's getting that from everybody.
Correct. Yeah.
So now it's just a big old pile of garbage noise. So, and again, it was slower back then, Adam. I learned, and now you can have more information, so you can get to better knowledge. What allowed me to have those conversations was I knew what was going on in the world beyond tax. Tax was a key, but I had to understand all those other things. They were a government contractor. What was going on with the government? How was the government doing rates? What was the growth opportunity of his company? Were we at a peak or a trough? Like, that has nothing to do with tax. That's just good business stuff. And then it developed into well, do your kids want to be in the company? Do they not? So the business acumen gave me the license to have the personal conversation, but I had to build trust before I just jumped into those very personal conversations.
And it also can't be like you're going day one with Jim Cramer, be like, hey, this is what I see happening with the interest rates. This is how you should run your company. You're not a banker. And he would be like, at that point, Jim would be like, who are you to tell me this, right? You don't
right.
have these things. So
right. It's that, yeah, it develops over time, but you have to do your own work. You have to be curious. Like I can't tell you how many feeds I get in a day, Adam, where I'm just looking at, and then I ask the question, why is that? Or why isn't that? Like, just don't take it on face value. Like somebody says, oh, this is what's happening. You're like, okay, well, are you sure? Yeah. Is that really a trend or is it not really a trend? So I can't stress enough. I had a very fortunate career because I was always a contrarian. If everybody said we should go left, I'm like, well, why should we go left? Yeah. I know you all think we should go left, but should we just look right a little bit before we go left? And as an advisor, my job was not to tell you yes, my job was to say, and I said this to great entrepreneurs, and Jim was just the first. When you get to meet with an entrepreneur, you're meeting with somebody who's brilliant. Problem I see, they see an opportunity. My job was to bring as many problems to the table to them that they could see, turn them into opportunities and overcome them. And that's where I was seen as really valuable, for not being the guy that said, yeah, let's all zig left.
Yeah.
no, let's see if we should zag right before we go left. And so being a contrarian, but you can't just be a contrarian for the sake of it. Oh, we should go left. Like people get annoyed with that. But if you build your knowledge to say, hey, there are other things I saw that have a systematic link to this, shouldn't we think about that? And I think everybody, Adam, at a young age just thinks that happens. No, it's lots of muscle memory, thinking, failing, stubbing your toe. I didn't get it all right every time I did that either. And I'm sure there were people along the way that said, get that guy out of here. He's a little annoying.
So all right, at GT, you're building this practice. So then you're
Mhm.
finally getting involved with like these entrepreneurs right from the get-go. What happens at GT that brings you finally to like where your final stop in public accounting at EY?
So another big financial crisis happened, Adam, called the financial crisis of 2008, the banking crisis. I was at Grant. It was an awful time for everybody. We had already fired the C's and B's, Adam. We were going through A's and, is he an A minus or an A this and getting rid of people. At the same time, I made partner at Grant and I was asked to move to Dallas in 2008. Couldn't sell my house, couldn't buy a house, I was commuting back and forth between Albuquerque and Dallas for 9 months. And I knew what it meant to be a partner because the first year I was a partner, unit earnings at Grant had gone up and up and up. And then they went down that year. So I was a partner at a certain dollar unit. I got my draw and I overdrew. So I had to write a check, a $10,000 check back to the firm my first year as a partner. So I can't sell my house. I'm trying to move my family and my kids are 8 and 4 at the time.
Yeah.
And I woke up in Dallas one morning and I said, enough's enough. And I went into the managing partner's office and I said, I quit. He goes, what are you doing? No plan. I just said, I'm unhappy. He goes, what are you doing? I said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just not going to do this. And I'm going back to be with my family. So I quit. I've done that a lot, Adam, and I don't recommend it as a strategy. I don't know if it's the right thing, but it was the right thing for me. Went back to New Mexico, affiliated with a local firm, which wasn't hard. That's the other thing I'd tell people is if you invest in this bank, you can have high confidence that you can find your next opportunity. I will caution people that in today's environment, don't quit a job before you have a job because recruiters look at that differently than they did way back then. That said, went to a local firm, became a partner, and then realized my clients were too big. One of my clients said, Bob, you're the smartest guy we know, but the 1040 you sign has $25 million of revenue. Your firm's only $30 million in revenue, not a good fit for us. So they said, well, consult with you. So at the local firm, I had the biggest clients, which were mine. They were good. The firm was good, but it hadn't dealt with those type of clients. So I spent all my time coordinating not only to do the work, but also with other firms who could support international stuff or things or different states that they were doing business in that we didn't have expertise for. So that lasted 11 months. In that 11 months, EY reached out to me. A gentleman, Chuck Kowal, was the private leader at EY at the time. And the recruiter called me 3 times and I'm like, I'm not going back to the Big Four. I've already done that. And then she said, well, Chuck's going to be in Dallas and Chuck would like to have dinner with you. So they flattered me, Adam. So that was, they're like, hey, we heard all about you. And so they quit recruiting me and they started flattering me. And I was like, well, it's a small world. I think I ought to go meet with the global leader in Dallas. So I went to Dallas. They had 3 partners there. And they basically said, Adam, we saw what you did at Grant. We want to do that at EY. Will you come join us? And I was like, so I was flattered, number one. And so then I said, yeah, I'm going to do that. So I joined, it was 11 months at the local firm and then joined EY. When I came to EY, my job was Southwest Private Financial Services tax leader. The practice was 12 people and $7.5 million.
Okay.
We rebuilt it from 2012 to 2018 to be 35 people and $25 million. And along the way, I acquired all these other titles. So the titles were just grab-itis, Adam. They were things that I worked on that gave titles that allowed us to have a market presence we didn't have before. So in 2016, I became the America's Family Office Leader. That was because we got a bunch of family office questions and I had done a bunch of structuring. Then we acquired a firm called Family Office Metrics. Then we acquired a firm called Family Enterprise Business Services. And so what I did was keep rebuilding what we were doing along all of these with the view of now what EY has is its DNA of a family enterprise. Family and business are intertwined. 4 key strategies for long-term success: growth, company capitalization, shareholder liquidity, generational transition. And we were very successful at it. So built those practices. And then in 2020, I was asked to become the America's Family Enterprise Leader, which was our overall strategy to family enterprises, companies, businesses, family offices across all service lines: audit, tax, consulting, advisory. So what I would say about EY is, and if you know about EY, we have our Entrepreneur of the Year program, very entrepreneurial firm. So it was like being a business owner within a large structure. So the mandate was go, grow, and build. And we were very entrepreneurial to do that, to acquire people, to build things, to do things differently and do things new. I was in the right place at the right time and had built experiences that were attractive to EY as they wanted to build something.
So I was a scribe at Entrepreneur of the Year.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was like, really, when you bring those people into the office for those final interviews, like you can tell they're like different. Like
Yes.
these people are, you can like just within like 5 minutes, you know they're different. So I understand how that helped. So you acquired all these firms at EY as the enterprise leader and the family office leader. Like, were you given a mandate to go acquire them, or you're like, I saw this opportunity, I'm gonna go? How much leeway did you had? You basically you were running this new like startup within EY.
So the other thing that people don't generally know about me is I'm one of those, whatever, 5% of Americans that sleep 4 or 5 hours a night, and that's good. So I'm a self-professed workaholic. Some people will say, Adam, my 10 is a 15. Like, so I run at that level. So I was so energized and excited about doing it. I just kept doing things. So I took an outside in view versus an inside out view. I'd spent so much time with business leaders. My whole premise was, what is it that they're missing in their complex world? What is it that they're missing in their complex world? So that's how we built it. So a lot of times we'd incubate and say, we think there's a service they'll buy. We'd incubate it and try to do it ourselves. And then we'd say, oh, look, there's somebody, like, we're doing this, but here's somebody who's doing it more. Why don't we just go acquire them? So we didn't have a mandate to acquire them. What we had our mandate was to be at EY as a whole, number one in the markets we chose to be in. So my mandate was to be the number one advisor to family enterprises. That's what my mandate was, and that's what I wanted to execute on. So there were 3 components of it. One was services that we delivered. What are the things that we would get paid for? Number 2 was speaking and writing. We needed to give back to the community with good thought leadership, not sales pitches, but good thought leadership that gave them tools and things they could use. The hope was they'd come use us, but really it was a good of the community. And then we created events. We created a family enterprise forums where the accounting and tax professionals come and they get CPE. But we came up with unique topics they couldn't get at the AICPA or the local CPA society, like things that were very unique to families. How do we think about interfamily loans when they do this? And those 3 things started to create buzz, and then we were able to do that and connect that across the country. But we took a view from, what do the professionals who work for these families need, and then what do these families need, which was very different than, what do we have to sell, and let's go sell that.
And then how intimately were you involved in these like events and speaking and writing? Were you like setting up the structures? Would you have a big agenda? How, because I know like right now, like EY especially is known for hosting the International Tax Conference in New York every single year.
Mm-hmm.
And now then you have like the family office you were like leading. So how big was that lift, and how much time were you spending doing all of this stuff then? Were you also advising clients at the same time?
Yeah. So about a third of my time was advising clients. Of that third, half of it was strategy and half was tax. A third of my time was spent on marketing and sponsorships, writing internally, and then a third of my time was spent on our events. So for our family office forums, we had 15 of them across the country, Adam. We decided to keep them local. I worked with the local teams to set the agendas, set the speakers. I was generally a speaker at those, but what we wanted were really good speakers with really good content. Then we had some signature events. We had 2 national roundtables. Roundtables are different than speaking. Roundtable is putting really intelligent people in the room around a table and having intimate discussions about solving their biggest problems without speakers or agendas or anything. And then we created summits where we brought business leaders together again over a day or two to dig into the biggest things that they were doing. So the scale and size of those is significantly smaller than the International Tax Conference. So our roundtables were 15 people. Our family enterprise events were 150, not 500 or 1,000 like the International Tax Conference.
And then, so from this time, you're like the enterprise leader. What made you decide like it's finally time to like slow down or like leave public practice over there? Like, when did you start having those thoughts, and when did you like finally decide to like finish off?
So at all the big firms, all of them have different times, but all of them have mandatory retirement for their partners, and that keeps them healthy. It's a good thing. So I would say when I turned 50, which was 5 years ago, I'm 55 now, I started thinking about this. Like, I need to think about the runway. I'd say what accelerated it were, it's public knowledge. We had Everest, which EY tried to go public. We had Optimus, which was our reconfiguration coming out of that. So for me, Adam, after those experiences and everything I built, I'm like, I've done about everything I think I can do at EY. Mm-hmm. We're about to go into a new phase of EY and who EY is coming out of those 2 things. And it's best to let the younger people who are not going to be here for 3 years or 2 years or 4 years. I mean, I had 4 years left if I didn't retire when I did. It's better to let them take it forward. And you can guess, I have a pretty loud voice, and I'm pretty, I don't keep my mouth shut in the room, right? So as a leader, you got to be smart enough to know if you're around the hoop, people are going to keep passing you the ball. And if you're not around the hoop, people will start to make their own decisions and drive it the way they did. So I just looked at it, and Adam, I'm fortunate enough that I met with my financial advisor, and they're like, hey, you'll have as many real dollars as you do today when you're 94 if you spend everything you're spending. And I'm like, okay, so I'm working for my kids. Yeah. I'm working for my kids, which is an incredible benefit and comfort, which allowed me then to say, okay, it is okay to step away, and it won't be like I would do it. And if I told you that I was gonna be like, oh, they're doing a great job, no, I'm critical of everything, but it was time to let somebody else take that journey. Hardest thing for leaders to do. Hardest thing. And I didn't want to be, if I was at my house, behind me, I have an Earl Campbell jersey, I got a Derrick Henry jersey, I'm a big sports guy. I would rather be the guy that left on top and retired than the athlete who came back and kept hanging on just because he was thought of as great at one time.
Okay. Makes sense. I can like see a lot of like sports metaphors, especially soccer comes into my mind right now. I'm a very big soccer fan. So
yeah, I don't want to be the European guy who came to the U.S. to play in the MLS because he couldn't play in Serie A anymore. I didn't want to be that guy.
So like, what do you think of like, okay, like Lionel Messi is playing in Miami right now, but he's still going to make the World Cup next year.
Yes, that's a different one. I think the MLS, but you remember back in the days when
David Beckham came in, yeah.
He was on the back end of his career. Not that he wasn't still good, but he was on the back end of his career. He wasn't on the front end. So, but the MLS has changed, certainly with Messi and others coming now.
So so you talked about like there's next phase coming around, and I'm seeing these firms pop up, especially there's one in the UK, really big backed by private equity money, and also like in the US too. These smaller firms doing specialized tax services and tax advisory don't have those conflicts with audit. How do you think that's going to change? And especially like, how is that going to change the big four accounting firms? Because I've been seeing partners going from these bigger four to these smaller firms to do their own practice.
don't know yet, Adam, so I wish I had a crystal ball. So what I know is private equity's disrupted professional services. We've seen private equity come in and out of a couple of firms. There's one second tier firm that's had two flavors of private equity now, one that was in them and bought out and another came in. I think the public markets need public accounting.
Mm-hmm.
If you read everything about our deal, the split of the tax practice was a big contention for us.
Correct.
I don't know that private equity, private equity has demands on what the returns have to be. So in my mind, I step back from that. So where I hope things go, Adam, is more collaboration. So AI is going to solve a lot of tax things and a lot of volume things.
Yeah.
All the big four have invested tremendous amounts of technology, tremendous amounts of dollars in technology to take the human out of the computer, like the data punch, data keying. So really starting to think about things. You will still need thinkers because laws are going to change, governments are going to change, things are going to be disrupted. I think it's easier than ever to enter.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's harder than ever to keep your value. Lots of people come in and go, oh, this is cool, it's the new thing. How soon does that wear off before it's the same old thing? God, who was it? Somebody said, what's the thing to be done that's not going to change? So go to Amazon. Nobody said I want less selection that's more expensive.
Yeah.
If you look at the premise of Amazon, it's like people will always want more selection that's cheaper. Like, what's the thing that's not going to change? People will always want accurate tax returns because they have to file them with a regulatory body or they get in trouble.
Correct.
So what's the thing that has to get done? And are you still within that? And what are you changing or disrupting in that? And if you're really not, sounds sexy, but is it really?
So then that brings back to the question, like if the humans coming out of the computer, but like you're also talking about, we talked about how your biggest asset is your brain and like your knowledge and the skill set you bring. Wouldn't you think it becomes a lot more commoditized with like how AI becomes the human brain next?
So two things, if you study population growth, we don't have enough people to do the jobs that we have right now. So Adam, there's a people issue that AI has to fill some of the gap on. We can't create enough humans. Number two, the complexity of our tax codes and our international tax codes is so complex that they're going to need us. So if I go back to your original, when you started in the profession, did you love punching in a K1 into a software?
No, that was like I was up until 2 a.m. most nights during
Right.
busy season.
And you were chasing, something was off and you were chasing it, right? So when I say take the human out of the computer, getting the data input done so that you can then step back from it and look at it, Adam, and go, are we really thinking about this right? Is everything on line 20A going in the right place? Or if I moved it around, or if I combine these things, could I get to a better answer, right? And the answer is, okay, could I get more deductions? Could I get a lower tax rate? Could I free up credits or deductions I don't have? Like, it's not that complex, right? I mean, like we act like it is, but like just back up to the bigger picture. I got to put all the income on there, and then I really need to maximize my deductions and credits, and or I need to get the income into a different rate bracket. I mean, that's
Yeah, that's all what it is, right? Income minus deductions gets you to taxable income.
right. But you
Basic
spend
common
hours
knowledge, yeah.
and hours and hours till 2 a.m. punching in meaningless numbers off of K1 before you can ever get to that question. So I'm saying do that and spend more time on the question, Adam, and you'll get a better answer.
Yeah. So bigger picture ideas come. And then the relationship becomes a lot more important too, because somebody's got to talk to the clients, somebody's got
Correct.
to find these opportunities or talk them through these opportunities. And that would become, that's where I feel like differentiators will like start standing out. Who can be a more better client service provider?
Correct. And how can you understand their business? Remember that their business, they're a government contractor. What things affect them? Are there incentives that affect them? Should they be thinking about where they put their next government contract? Like, that's not tax, but it could have a huge impact on their tax.
Yeah. No, that is amazing. So what's next? So you retired. You retired early, actually, because I know it's what 59 at EY to retire. You retired at 55. So what's next? How for your retirement? Like now, I always ask these questions to our guests, be like, what's next after tax? And now you're actually there. So what is next after tax for you?
I'm figuring that out. I've stepped away. There's the opportunity to go to professional services like you talked about, Adam, firms that don't have the same constraints as the Big Four. There's the opportunity to speak and teach, which on your own accord. And then there's the tremendous outreach, which I'm very thankful for, from lots of people once I retired. So let me say it differently. When you're working in the role I was in, lots of people go, he'd never consider, he'd never think, he'd never, the amount of things that people said, hey, would you consider this? They never would have brought those to me when I was working. So I've been back from vacation for 2 weeks. The amount of those that have come to me that I'm filtering through have been amazing, and I don't know where those will end up. If you take what I did at EY, it's some combination of all those things. It's just, do I do it as a free agent, or, do I re-sign? I was with the Yankees and I go to the Dodgers. I don't,
The
or
opportunities are endless, right?
right, or I decide I'm not going to be a player. I'm going to go coach, AAA baseball, as an analogy. So I'm taking it day by day. I'm very flattered and humbled by the outreach and people who have come to me, and still want to give back to things like your podcast and different people. And I've had quite a few young folks reach out at them, and it's one of the joys I have in what I do. So the one thing I'll leave you with is the other thing I'd encourage your readers to, or your listeners. There's a book called The On Purpose Person.
Okay.
I read it when I was a young manager, and it's about how do I live my perfect day with all the competing things, my family, I saw your cat right there, my pet, my family, what do I enjoy doing? I read that book 30 years ago, went through what it told me, and then I've updated it. So I did have a little bit of a plan, which was that book. And what I will say to people is I accomplished everything I set out to do when I did that 30 years ago. So
Nice. Where are you headed next right now? I know you're at the airport, so.
I'm headed back to Dallas to see my lovely wife, Maria. And then I am headed to Nashville to have a wonderful, fun weekend with some friends of mine.
Perfect. That is exciting stuff.
Yeah. I'm trying to enjoy my next chapter in a different way than what I did before. But it's been an absolute pleasure, Adam, and hopefully there's some value for your listeners and folks coming out of
That's
this.
been great. Like someone like you that has been through it all, like seen the different aspects, and then the knowledge you brought, like this has been like tremendously valuable. And I really appreciate what you've done, taking time off, especially like when you're at the airport, out of retirement, and then hopefully get to see like excited to follow along what you do next. Then. So,
Excellent.
thank you so
All right.
much.
Be well.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, yeah. Bruce.